Game on. President Biden and former President Trump preparing for next week's debate. How they're doing it is quite different. Former Obama White House official Van Jones says Biden does not have a choice. He has to succeed next Thursday night.
This is the entire election as far as I'm concerned. The entire world will be watching. If you are a carbon-based life form, you're going to be watching. If you've got a functioning brainstem, you're going to be watching. Because if Biden goes out there and messes up, it's game over. If he walks out there and a week later he's lower in the polls, it's panic in the party.
Insiders are telling Fox News Trump is skipping any kind of a mock debate and instead working with allies and aides on going after Biden on things like the economy. And Trump is multitasking. He'll be campaigning in battleground Pennsylvania tomorrow. Biden, however, we're told, is locked down with advisors at Camp David for a week of prep. A new column says that only proves he's not up for the job. Here's a quote. Either Biden is so unprepared or unable to defend his own record that he needs 7 days of debate prep away from the presidency to be ready to speak for a total of some 35 minutes on Thursday, or that task is so monumental for him and his current mental state and at his age that he needs a vacation just to steady himself for that task. End of quote. Power panel now. Guy Benson, Fox News contributor and host of The Guy Benson Show on Fox News Radio, and Jose Aristimuno, former DNC deputy press secretary. Jose, I'm going to come to you first. What's your reaction to that column in the Washington Examiner and what it had to say about President Biden?
Good to see you, Aris. Look, this is what I'll say. I think first and foremost, we're going to let the American people make a decision if Joe Biden performs well in the debate or he doesn't perform well. Let me say this. What do people do before a major test? They study. That's what you're supposed to do, right? So I don't getting criticized for wanting to do well in a debate. I don't understand the logic behind that.
It doesn't bother you that he's gone for a week and yet his opponent will be campaigning? It's just a thought and an open question.
Everyone's got to well, you know what? His opponent needs to campaign a whole lot because he was locked up. He was in a courtroom for a long time.
We're going to fix your audio, and while I'm doing that with my crew, maybe you consider the fact that the fundraising is now tougher for Joe Biden, and Trump is beating him in that category. So when you talk about campaigning, fundraising, that sort of thing, Biden's not winning. Guy.
Well, look, I think it's probably a smart move, actually, for the Biden campaign to send the president off for a long period of time to rest and to prepare. I'm not quite where Van Jones is, like, oh, it's over if he does very poorly. But there's a lot riding on this debate next Thursday. And Joe Biden does not really have a lot of interaction in a sustained way, standing there for 2 hours, answering questions. This has not been in his wheelhouse, I think, for various reasons recently. So to really prepare him, I think, is the right move. I think Trump should take this very, very seriously. I think he should be preparing more. He can go on the campaign trail. He can multitask. But I think maybe having a mock debate would be a good idea, really workshopping the questions that I think we all know are coming and how he can pivot back to the issues that would help win him the election rather than getting dragged down different rabbit holes. I think that would really behoove Trump, and we'll see if that's something he's willing to do, because it will take some discipline, but preparation here, I think, is in order.
You know, it may not just be the fundraising that I mentioned either, Guy. And again, we're working on Jose Aristimuno's audio. Here's NBC's Chuck Todd.
I don't mean to simplify this, but, you know, Donald Trump's rhetoric even his sort of swagger looks more like 2016 in the campaign you covered so closely, Katie, than he looks in 2020. When Trump's losing, the worst version of Trump shows up, and when Trump's winning or he thinks he's ahead, he's actually a different person, a different candidate. The Donald Trump in Detroit and those events he did, he was oddly loose. He was trying to be funny and all of this. If he somehow drops the grievance, he could end up looking more like that 2016 candidate where he's the outside disruptor.
You know, Jose, I'm hoping you could hear some of that as I come to you to get your response on it. This idea that, you know, be careful what you wish for on the left side of the aisle with Donald Trump. He is winning. And when you look at those key battleground state polls, it's been consistently so.
Yeah, Harris, look, it's going to be a break or make moment for the president. He needs to perform well. If we look at Donald Trump at the beginning, he said, look, Biden is incapable to do debates. He's going to trip. He can't tie his own shoe. Now he's saying that he's going to do well. So Trump keeps going and flipping, going back and forth. At the end of the day, the American people need to make a decision. Now, both candidates need to talk to the future. I think the mistake is if Trump starts talking about the past and starts getting into personal attacks, I think he'll lose the debates like he lost in 2020. But I agree with Van Jones, and I agree with a lot of Democrats that are concerned that say Joe Biden needs to be on the offensive and he needs to perform well. There's no question about that.
You know, there's one thing to be on the offensive, Guy, and I would say this for both of these men as they go forward. Keep in the forefront the American people. Donald Trump doesn't have a problem doing that because he's under a gag order, and he will be under a gag order that night too, unless something huge happens that we are not anticipating at this point. So it will be interesting if Biden chooses to be the angry man from the State of the Union. What will that look like?
And how does Trump parlay it? Because there are going to be questions, I think, about January 6th and who won the last election and, you know, the convicted felon stuff. That's all coming. Abortion is coming. You can see and you can anticipate what they're going to do. So I think Trump needs to be absolutely ready to make his points. He doesn't have to, you know, back away from what he wants to say, but make that quick, make it pithy, and then get back to the bread and butter of this campaign, which is, are you better off today than you were, let's say, 5 years ago? 2020 was an insane year with COVID and everything else. How about 2019? How is the country doing in 2019? We can get back to that. This is sort of his message. We can do that again because we're failing these last 4 years. If that's what the American public decides on one way or the other, I think Trump wins the election.
Well, you know what? Ironically, given all that you just talked about with the pandemic, and I know Jose wouldn't argue with this because we both remember the number, 1.4% inflation at the end of Trump's term, even given all of the pandemic. It's fascinating because we haven't even sniffed that category under Biden. In fact, at one point, we were north of 8%. All right, gentlemen, I'll bring you back. Jose, Guy, thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kayleigh McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.